The warbands of the World Eaters, a legion of bloodthirsty marauders, known for their unmatched martial prowess in close combat, used by the Emperor even before their fall to chaos as a band of shock troops to decimate populations and bring forced compliance to worlds across the galaxy. After falling to the worship of the blood god of chaos, the World Eaters only descended further into their madness and bloodthirst, slaughtering enemies and reaping skulls in the name of Khorne. But sometimes a particularly dedicated or insane warpsmith will create a massive demon engine to assist them in cutting a bloody swath across the galaxy. These titanic constructs are powered by the steam from boiling the blood of murderers and are among the most powerful of weapons wielded by any of the Chaos gods. The Lord of Skulls takes the form of a giant cornate warrior bound to a large set of tracks. Serving as a prison to the souls of bloodthirsters, the Lord of Skulls is often followed and worshipped by demons and berserkers alike as they pile skulls and bodies atop the engine during battles in order to give more offerings to their blood god.
This is my Lord of Skulls. It is the most expensive kitbash that I have ever kitbashed, in theory anyway. If I had bought all of the model kits involved individually at the time that I did this kitbash, it would have cost me significantly more than the official Lord of Skulls model, but I got most of it out of my pile of shame at the time. We'll talk a little bit more about the money and the sunk cost fallacy a little bit later, but let's talk about the parts that went into this monstrosity. See, at the time when I built this, I already had an unbuilt Imperial Knight in my pile of shame, and when I became maybe a little bit too obsessed with needing to get a hold of a Lord of Skulls, I decided to use this as a primary component for this new build. So the top half is of course this Imperial Knight. Back when the Renegade box set came out, it was $195 for 2 knights plus some terrain. Imperial Knights would never be so cheap again. Compared to their price at the time of, I believe, $130 a piece, this for an extra $70 got me an extra knight and an extra piece of terrain. However, compared to the current prices of $170 per night, that's only an extra $25 for a full night and terrain extra, which makes the deal look even better in hindsight, not that we could have known at the time. Now at the time, I only needed one Imperial Knight. I built him fairly standard, I made him so that his arms were swappable so I could do different weapon loadouts, and I painted him up in a fairly rusty style so that I could put him in with my Chaos Warbands without having to make him too spiky. In fact, I still need to finish painting these swappable weapons. I got through the main chunk of them and then I just kind of got distracted. The rest of that Renegade box set went onto my slate of upcoming projects because at the time I didn't really need 2 bog standard knights. I wanted to keep that second one on hand for when I had a very specific, unique project that I wanted to use them for. And it's a good thing that I didn't build the second one at the time because this was back in 8th edition 40k and the Tyranids that I usually play against, I learned very quickly could wipe a knight off the table in 1 round of Genesteal or melee combat. And so this yellow Rusty Knight did not see a whole ton of combat after those first couple of battles, and he's sat around for a couple editions since. The bottom half of this build is a Land Raider. It is the only kit that I actually built at the time of building this kit bash, and I turned it around backwards. I did that for 3 different reasons. The first reason is just to break up the silhouette, change it up, make it less recognizable as a Land Raider, and to make it its own unique thing so that it would meld better with this kit bash. The second reason that I did this is because I thought it looked a little too awkward facing the right way around, and how was he going to swing that axe past those assault ramps and those weapons on the front and all of that? It would have looked a little ergonomically awkward, I think. So it looked a lot more usable and believable turning it around backwards. Now the third reason that I turned this Land Raider around backwards is because of a very specific gripe that I have with this model. And don't get me wrong, the Land Raider is one of my favorite models in 40k. I'm building 2 more of them right now, and I've got another Chaos Kit Bash coming up that's going to utilize the treads from one. However, these tanks are inspired by some historical tanks, and there is one big thing that has always bothered me about it, and that's that these tank tread patterns are backwards versus the inspiration where they come from. And the reason why the tank treads are shaped in a certain way on these historical tanks is for a very specific reason. See, On a tank like this British Mark IV that I've got printed here, those higher parts of the tank treads are leading the vehicle, and that makes it a lot easier for that vehicle to cross trenches and climb over obstructions in the battlefield. The Land Raider takes this historical inspiration, turns it around backwards, and puts the lower part of the tread in the front of the vehicle so it can barely mount a speed bump, let alone an actual obstruction. Apparently, the battlefields and roads of the 41st millennium are fairly clear of debris and require very little traversing of difficult terrain. So this Kitbash was kind of my one chance to fix this gripe and alleviate this problem without destroying the cool aesthetic of a Land Raider in the process. Next up, the Lord of Skulls has this huge cowcatcher plow on the front of it. Mine is a much smaller version. I cobbled it together from the plow from an Imperial Guard tank sprue and a little piece of the Mechanicus terrain that came in that Renegade box set. Further pieces of that Mechanicus terrain set were utilized to build that smokestack on the back of this beast, as well as using these vent covers to cover what would have been hatches for both soldiers and weaponry that I no longer would need in this version of this tank. The Knight's Gatling cannon barrels came from a Gundam weapon accessory sprue, and I did magnetize this as well so that I could put in a fairly standard battle cannon in its place and make use of a couple of different weapon loadouts with this model. The giant axe, if you want to be generous enough to call it an axe, started its life as the standard Imperial Knight chain sword, and I cut it up, I rearranged it. The shaft of this axe was an old beat paintbrush handle, and then a couple of other pieces made their way into this reconstruction, including a couple of pieces of plastic from those dollar store Final Faction toys, as well as a couple plates from the Chaos Tank accessory sprue. This is really the only piece of the build that I'm not 100% happy with. I think I got the proportions a little bit wrong on it. The arm should have been a little longer and the weapon shaft a little bit shorter. But considering this is my only gripe with the whole project, consider me pretty happy overall. Speaking of proportions, I did have to shorten the arm part of the gun arm just a little bit so that it would fit comfortably right below the shoulder pad and on top of the tank hull instead of hanging at some sort of awkward angle where the full length arm would have set. And finally, skulls. You've seen them now. I took the Citadel box of skulls and I put them everywhere. I stuck them in where the headlights were supposed to be. I put them in the doors and the nooks and crannies. I used the largest skull in the box to replace the knight's head. I wanted to make sure this thing had skulls all over it, and skulls from many places, including a couple different demons and several different species of Xenos. Now, once I had the whole thing put together, I painted him up in my fairly standard pre-Heresy inspired World Eaters paint scheme. It's mostly white that's been grimed up a little bit. The shoulder pads and some of the other smaller panels are painted in ultramarine blue. The trim is in Screaming Bell, and then I put gore all over him. I used lots of different red inks and paints for this, but mostly I used Citadel Blood for the Blood God. Now, in addition to the magnetized cannon barrel, I did make him modular in one other way. Now, originally I made it so that he came apart at the waist just for transport concerns. I wanted to be able to take him apart a little bit, pack him a little bit more neatly in a case, and be able to take him with me to a game. I realized after building and painting this whole Kitbash that I could still build those Imperial Knight legs, and then I could take this top half and I could swap them over between the different bottom halves depending on what a list called for. I could utilize this as either a Lord of Skulls, a Khitan Ravager, or a Chaos Knight. I'm going to finally be finishing that second half of this build in a future video, and I'm going to build him some custom panels on the legs. I'm going to Kitbash a cool scenic base for him to be on top of. I'm going to make it so that these legs make him appropriately big and imposing so that he can be a proper Khitan Ravager. But for now, let's talk about how much this thing cost me. Now, as I mentioned, I had most of these parts in my pile of shame at the time, but let's start by comparing to a regular Lord of Skulls model. The current list price for this model is $170. Now, for my Kitbash, the first and major piece of it is an Imperial Knight kit, which is also currently available for $170. Everything after this point costs more than just buying the official model. The second largest part of this Kitbash is a Land Raider. Of course, you'd want to get a Chaos Land Raider. They are still more plentiful on a market where the Land Raider has become scarce. I am hoping that doesn't mean that the Land Raider is going away with Firstborn soon. That being said, the Chaos Land Raiders are still in a better supply than the Loyalists, and they come with that Chaos Tank accessory sprue that you'll need for it. The list price on a Chaos Land Raider is still $90. It's available from time to to time on the GW website. They tend to be selling between 100 and 120 on the secondhand market. But let's stick with the 90 for the sake of these calculations. The Sector Mechanicus Forge Shrine, the closest thing that I can find to the piece of terrain that was in that Renegade box set, is available by itself now for $60. The Citadel box of skulls is $35, and then the small plow that I used on this is available on the Imperial Guard tank accessory sprue, which is the only sprue in this build that is available by itself. That is $15 direct from GW. For those of you playing at home, that comes to a grand total of $370 if you were building this from scratch. That is $200 more than just buying the official model. This is not a cost-effective way to kitbash if you don't already have those pieces in your scrap pile. However, I managed to save some money just because of the fact that I had so much of it on hand. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about the sunk cost fallacy. Now, the Oxford Dictionary definition is the phenomenon whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or a course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it's clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. So basically, we can all kind of get stuck in this rut, in this fallacy, where we view money that we've spent in the past as if we still have it, as if that asset is still available to us. Sometimes, depending on how you get stuck into the logic, you could kind of get stuck on, but then I'm losing out on all the money I've already spent on this. My point ultimately being, the money that I spent on the Renegade box set, the money that I spent on that knight that's sitting in my scrap bin, is gone. The Lord of Skulls is now. I would have been falling for this fallacy if I had decided that the unbuilt Imperial Knight that I wasn't building was just like too precious or too expensive to waste on a kitbash. But I did manage to make the cheaper decision in the moment. Instead of buying a nearly $200 Lord of Skulls, I bought what was at the time a $60 or $70 Chaos Land Raider, and I kitbashed with that. I saved myself over $100 by doing this. So, you know, a couple of takeaways and a couple of points to be made from that, right? The first thing is I want to just say, don't be afraid to do these big kit bashes, especially if you already have the pieces in your collection. Don't forget that you got into this hobby to get some cool models on the table or the display shelf, to build a cool army full of, you know, tanks or monsters or infantry or whatever it is that you want. And just because you bought the shiny, trendy new box when it came out doesn't mean that you have to build it in the way that it was originally intended when you get around to that build. And don't get stuck on what that model cost you years ago when you bought it. The biggest possible waste of that would be to let it sit on the shelf for another 20 years. And finally, if there's a unit that you want to put on the table and that model's too expensive at the moment or just not what you're looking for, dig through your bits bin. Once you've built some sort of a backlog of models, you're going to find that you have a lot of opportunity to build some really cool, personalized custom models. And I think that a lot of people, myself included, get stuck on thinking that their pile of shame is a large stack of boxes of things that need to be built in the way that they were originally intended. And if I don't need that model, then now's not the time, but maybe I can turn that into a model I'm actually looking for. Now, this also comes with the parallel point that kit bashing is not always about saving money. Sometimes you want to kit bash a Chaos Lord that is just extra cool to lead your army, and that's going to cost you more than paying the $35 for the standard character model. And if that's worth it to you, it is worth it. But I also can't tell you the number of times that I've wanted to build a unit and I've had 90% of the parts to build a custom version of that unit already in my bits bin, and I've had to go scrape the bits sites or 3D print one or two weapons or something to complete the build. I want to thank everybody who's been subscribing to the channel. I'm over 750 subscribers now. I would love to be able to get to 1,000 by the end of June. If you want to follow along and see some more of my chaos monstrosities, please feel free to subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you can see when those new models come out. I will be kit bashing the second part of this Titan soon. I've got a couple of other things in the works, including another strange Land Raider kit bash that is a little too strange for me to sum up right at the moment. If you want to see another chaos monstrosity that I've built, I've got my Trader Guard Baneblade right here. I kit bashed that from a $17 toy tank, and I used a lot of unique materials and all that that are detailed in that video. Otherwise, I've got some terrain videos and a couple other things. I've got some more terrain videos coming up in the future as well, and I hope to see you around for it.